Good morning, respected eminent faculty members from NMC as assessor and respected faculty member from International Medical Education Unit as observer, Honorable Emeritus Chairperson M.L. Sonkar sir, Honorable President sir, Honorable Chairperson and eminent faculty members, senior teachers, dear friends and my dear students. We are having this combined clinical rounds on every Wednesday and lights. I would like to tell our eminent guest faculty members that this activity was started 6 years back and it was a brainchild of Emeritus Chairperson who want to upgrade the academics of this institute, and he consistently and uninterrupted kept on observing, critically guiding us and providing the all support what we needed for clinical combined rounds, and due to that we are reaching, and every year we are gaining the new heights as far as clinical combined rounds are concerned. So my sincere thanks is to Honorable Emeritus Chairperson sir, who are guiding force for all of us, and this program is very popular amongst faculty as well as students. So in this combined clinical round, cases are there of diagnostic and therapeutic complexities, multidisciplinary and guest faculty and experts are also giving the feedback, and they are also participant whenever they are here. Residents' involvement, discussion and participation is encouraged, and rare cases and important cases are published in the reputed international journals, and we are having the advance schedule for this CCR of next 1 year, and during COVID time this combined clinical rounds were continued on online, and video recording is also done for the benefit of the students for educational purpose. So in this usually case presentation is there with the medical history, emphasis is on history as well as examination, and after history as well as examination, and after history possibilities are encouraged with the logical thinking, and physical examination is after that also differential diagnosis are made, so student can develop the stepwise approach, and after that investigations are discussed and whole case final diagnosis is reached. So that culture of the history and examination since long is emphasized in this combined clinical rounds, and after that diagnosis, recent guidelines and evidence-based treatment is discussed, and outcome is also discussed. So in this holistic understanding of the case is there rather than individual subject specific. Case-based approach is there with self-directed learning as a core element, because students are preparing for 7 or 10 days and we are giving the feedback on a stepwise manner, and clinical examination and history is emphasized. Objectives are to develop the clinical reasoning skills and logistic approach, to participate in discussion, to promote self-directed learning, to develop multidisciplinary and integrated approach, and alignment is suggested by our combined clinical rounds core committee, providing them the alignment of the multiple disciplines, to act with evidence-based guidelines and to promote research as well as publication in international journals, and to develop skills for professional presentations. Evaluation is also done by the review committee before presentation, and during presentation senior faculty members are there, 4 judges are there, including Emeritus Chairperson, and this is the feedback form, and we provide the feedback to the presenting departments. These are our previous combined clinical rounds. Our eminent guest faculty member from Tata Memorial Hospital, Dr. Sudeep Gupta, and other Dr. Pandya is also there from the USA. They also given their valuable feedback to our participants. These are our participants from the international students who are visiting our institute. They are also participating in the combined clinical rounds. And these are the recent publication in last 6 months in various journals, international repute, including Royal College, Journal of Edinburgh, and other journals. And our two students, postgraduates, are going to present their posters and presentation in this International Conference of Critical Care Nephrology in London after few days only. So these all cases are presented in combined clinical rounds. So now I invite Dr. Puneet to continue with our clinical case.
Thank you so much, sir. A very good morning to all the respected doctors and my dear colleagues. Today I am going to present a case of a 41-year-old female with vision loss. So, a 41-year-old female was referred from the Department of Neurosurgery to our OPD with the complaints of diminished vision in both eyes since 4 years, headache since 4 years, coarsening of facial features since 3 years, and shortness of breath since 2 months. She had a history of diminished vision since 4 years, which was painless, gradually progressive, bilateral, more on the right side, with a history of recent worsening in vision, which brought her to the hospital for first time. She had history of headache since 4 years, which was intermittent, diffused, mild to moderate in intensity, for which she used to take analgesics on and off, and it used to get relieved. Headache was not associated with nausea, vomiting, photophobia, phonophobia, any autonomic symptoms like lacrimation, nasal congestion, or drooping of eyelid, or decreased sweating. Now, this is the picture of our patient. I would like the audience to enumerate the clinical features they are observing in this picture. Anyone? What are the features they can actually observe here?
Boss, hirsutism, coarsening of the mandible.
Anything else you're observing here? Alright, thank you. We would be discussing the clinical features of her in the later half of the presentation. So, she also had history of shortness of breath since 2 months, which was mainly on exertion, on climbing upstairs, MMRC grade 1, and it was not associated with any chest pain, orthopnea, paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, fever, chronic cough, pedal edema, puffiness over face, or reduced urine output. She is a known case of diabetes mellitus since 4 months on 4 oral anti-diabetic drugs, but it was poorly controlled. There was no history of hypertension, coronary artery disease, tuberculosis, bronchial asthma, chronic obstructive airway disease, thyroid disorder, chronic liver disease, or chronic liver failure. She achieved her menarche at the age of 14 years with regular cycles, with the cycle length and cycle duration being normal. She resumed menstruating after her second delivery in August 2009. She cycled regularly for 3 years. She developed oligomenorrhea for 8 months, followed by amenorrhea since 10 years. There was no history of any hyperandrogenism. There was no history of any abnormal hair growth or excessive acne, milk discharge from the breast, or lactational failure. She has 2 daughters, elder being 17 years and younger being 13 years of age. There was no significant family history of similar illness. So to summarize the whole case till now, she had painless, gradually progressive bilateral vision loss since 4 years with recent worsening, intermittent, diffused, mild to moderate headache since 4 years with no migrainous or autonomic symptoms, coarsening of facial features since 3 years, and shortness of breath MMRC grade 1 since 2 months, not related to any systemic disorder or any infection. So I would like to ask the audience, what is the provisional diagnosis of the patient? Anybody who can answer? Yes. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So, she is a case of acromegaly with secondary diabetes mellitus with dilated cardiomyopathy or valvular heart disease due to acromegaly and query pituitary adenoma. So, I would now like to ask about the differential diagnosis of this patient. Can anybody tell me the differential diagnosis of this patient? Anybody wants to try? Yes? Alright. Differential diagnosis based on the history of the clinical condition. Alright.
Any kind of metastasis in the pituitary or craniopharyngioma, or there are MEN syndromes which involves the pituitary.
Alright, thank you. So, the differential diagnosis to this case can be pseudoacromegaly. So, what are the DDs for pseudoacromegaly? It can be a pachydermoperiostosis, severe insulin resistance, insulinoma, drug-induced like minoxidil and phenytoin, hypothyroidism and obesity. So what is pachydermoperiostosis? It is basically acropachy, which means clubbing of the fingers. Dermo means something related to the skin. There is thickening of the skin, and periostosis means there is growth of a new bone. There is one more component to it, that is hyperhidrosis, that is increased sweating. So continuing with the case, on general examination she was overweight, otherwise her general examination was normal. So coming on to the findings, as we can all see in the first picture, she had frontal bossing, she had prominent supraorbital ridge, there is depression of the nasal bridge, there is a wide and thick nose, there is thick lips, there is enlargement of the mandible with prognathism, there is an increased space between the dentures. There was also a history of hoarseness of voice, hyperhidrosis and seborrhea in this patient. On further examining the patient, it was found that the patient had increased width of the fingers and increased heel pad thickness. The normal heel pad thickness is less than 23 millimeters, while in our patient it was 26 millimeters. So we took another history. So there was no personal history of any bone pain, bony swelling, fracture, renal calculi or any surgery. There was no family history of any malignancy, renal calculi or any surgery. There was no examination evidence of collagenomas, angiofibromas, lipomas or Café-Alou spots. Now again I would like to ask the audience, why was this history specifically being taken? Anybody wants to try? So there are syndromic associations of acromegaly such as MEN1 syndrome or McCune-Albright syndrome. On systemic examination, on neurological examination, she had bitemporal hemianopia Otherwise, her neurological examination was normal. On respiratory examination, her chest was bilaterally symmetrical with decreased chest movements on the left side, decreased chest expansion on the left side. There was a dull note on the left lung fields all over on percussion. There was reduced air entry in the left lung fields on auscultation. Her cardiovascular and per abdominal examinations were normal. On investigation, her CBC and ESR came out to be normal. Her renal function tests and serum electrolytes were normal. Her liver function tests were normal. She had uncontrolled diabetes with HbA1c of 10.5%. Her hormonal profile was suggestive of significantly raised insulin-like growth factor 1 and post-glucose growth hormone. Her prolactin levels were 782. Her free T4 levels and cortisol levels were significantly low. Follicular stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone and estradiol were significantly low. However, her calcium and Paret hormone came out to be normal. On chest X-ray, there was a complete opacification of left hemithorax. Her 2D echo was normal.
कॉलेज HODs जितने भी हैं वो कॉलेज अपने अपने डिपार्टमेंट में चले जाएं, मेडिकल कॉलेज के HODs.
So to summarize the whole case till now, she had chief complaints of headache, vision loss, dyspnea and secondary amenorrhea with florid acromegalic features, decreased breath sound on the left lung fields. On biochemistry, there were increased IGF-1, post-glucose growth hormone, prolactin levels and HbA1c levels, while decreased FT4, serum cortisol, LH, FSH and estradiol. On radiology, there was complete opacification of the left hemithorax. So what is the clinical interpretation of the whole case? She is a case of acromegaly with secondary diabetes mellitus, with hyperprolactinemia, with secondary hypopituitarism in the form of hypothyroidism, hypocortisolism and hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, with opacified left hemithorax which needs to be evaluated. She was started on basal bolus insulin regimen where she required very high doses of insulin. In view of hypopituitary, she was given hormonal replacement in the form of levothyroxine and hydrocortisone. In view of vision loss, ophthalmology opinion was taken. Respiratory medicine opinion was taken in view of shortness of breath and left opacification of hemithorax. MRI SELA with contrast and CECT chest were done. Now I would like to invite Dr. Ayush Singh Verma from the Department of Ophthalmology to tell us about the ophthalmological findings.
Thank you, Dr. Puneet. Good morning, respected faculty and dear colleagues. The patient was referred to us by the Department of Endocrinology for an ophthalmic evaluation. The chief complaint of the patient was a painless progressive diminution of vision since 4 years, which in both eyes, right more than left, which worsened significantly in the past 2 months. A suite of ophthalmological tests was done on the patient, which is normally done in such cases. The ocular examination in both eyes demonstrated a mild proptosis. The pupils in both eyes were round, regular and reactive. Visual acuity was 2/60 in the right eye and 6/60 in the left eye. The intraocular pressure in both eyes was normal. The extraocular movements in both eyes was normal in all directions of gaze. The slit lamp examination demonstrated a nuclear cataract in both eyes. The OCT demonstrated mild perifoveal edema in the left eye. And here we have a picture showing the nuclear cataract on slit lamp examination. Here we have the patient's fundus photograph in the lower half and a normal fundus photo in the upper half for comparison. The three main things that we look for in a normal fundus are the disc, the macula and the vessels. The patient had dot blot hemorrhages in both eyes, cotton wool spots, hard exudates in the left eye and flame-shaped hemorrhages in both eyes. The findings were indicative of moderate non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy in both eyes, with left eye having more findings than the right. Here we were at a dilemma because the fundus and slit lamp findings of the left eye were worse, but the vision in the left eye was better. So on further inquiry, the patient also complained of a loss of side vision, and we performed concentration field testing, and that confirmed the same. So automated perimetry of the patient was advised. Here we have the patient's perimetric findings in the lower half and normal perimetry in the upper half for comparison. The dark areas indicate scotomas, which are areas or zones of loss of visual field. As we can see, there is a loss of the outer or temporal visual fields in both the eyes. In addition to that, there is a slight nasal involvement of the left eye. At this juncture, I'd like to pose a question to the audience. What are the causes of a bitemporal hemianopia? To the medicine residents in general and others as well, if they want to answer. Anyone?
Any volunteers? Just stand up and say loudly, please.
All right, that's good. That's one cause. Any more causes?
Okay, carry on, please. Carry on.
All right. So these are some of the these are some of the common causes that cause a bitemporal hemianopia. Out of this, pituitary adenomas are the most common. What is the underlying mechanism that causes this bitemporal hemianopia? Basically, it's a compression of the optic chiasm due to mass effect in the cellar area. The optic chiasm contains decussating fibers from the nasal halves of each of the retinas, right?
Doctor, how many fibers are there in one nerve?
So one
optic nerve.
1 million nerve fibers average.
And after optic chiasma, how?
500,000.
500 to 50,000.
In the optic chiasma, sir, there is still 1 million because both of them are 500,000. So here we still have 1 million.
And after crossing?
After crossing, sir, we still have 1 million because there are both the fields, right?
Both fields.
Both fields,
So
yes.
50% of right and
Yes,
50% of
50%.
left.
Only in
But that has significance over what is the area of the compression on the optic nerve.
Yes, sir.
Alright?
Different areas have different kind of field effects that we see. Here is the here we have an optic chiasmal compression, due to which we have the nasal retinas that are being damaged, and nasal retinas correspond to temporal visual fields. So we have a temporal field effect.
This itself shows that there is something wrong with the sella turcica.
Yes, there is a cellar mass effect which is leading to this issue. Now I'd like to call my colleague Dr. Nalin Dadich from the Department of Radiology to shed some light on the radiological findings of this patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ayush. Good morning, everyone. So coming to the chest X-ray, this is a radiograph PA view showing complete opacification of the left hemithorax. There is crowding of the ribs of the left ribs and no significant contralateral shift towards the right side. No contralateral shift towards the right side. Also, we can notice that the left hemidiaphragm and the cardiac shadow is also not clearly visualized. So, keeping in mind these chest X-ray findings, few differential diagnosis came to our mind. So, number one was left lung mass lesion with collapse. Number second was left hydrothorax with a large pleural effusion, but because there was no significant contralateral midline shift, this was considered less likely. Number third was left lung consolidation, but since there was lack of aortobronchogram, this diagnosis was also considered less likely, and the fourth one was collapse without a mass. So we followed it by a contrast enhanced CT scan of the chest of the patient, and it confirmed our provisional diagnosis of a lung mass with distal collapse. So here are the axial and coronal images of the CT chest of the patient. Here we can see a large lung mass with its epicenter in the hilar and perihilar region, involving significant amount of the lung parenchyma. Here we can see the lung is compressing the left main bronchus, causing its obstruction and distal collapse. We can see the enhancement of the lesion is equal to the aorta and the pulmonary artery. That signifies that it has great enhancement. we can also see that there are areas of central necrosis and calcific foci within the lesion. Also we can see the lesion is infiltrating into the mediastinum and abutting the descending aorta. Now we can see a small, enlarged subcarinal lymph node. So this suggested the possibility of neoplastic etiology, likely malignant. Now coming to MRI sella, firstly I will tell about some normal anatomy of the pituitary. So this is a T1 weighted image of the pituitary and this is a T1 plus contrast image of the pituitary. The anterior area is the anterior pituitary which appears iso-intense, and the posterior crescent shaped hyperintensity that we can see here is the posterior pituitary. This is the posterior pituitary stalk and this is the optic chiasma. On T1 plus contrast images we can see that there is a homogeneous enhancement of the pituitary gland and the pituitary stalk. Now in our case we did a MRI contrast of the sella of the patient and we can see a large, this is a T1 weighted, T2 weighted and post contrast images of the patient. We can see a large sella and suprasellar mass lesion extending into the floor of the sphenoid sinus. Superiorly it compresses and displaces the optic chiasma, and effacement of the anterior inferior part of the third ventricle is seen. We can see despite its large size, there are very few cystic areas, small cystic areas noted, and it shows homogeneous enhancement. So now coming to the coronal images, this is how a normal pituitary looks. This is a T1 weighted, T2 weighted and post contrast images of the coronal section of the same sella and suprasellar mass lesion. Here we can see despite its large size, there is no involvement of the bilateral cavernous segments of the internal carotid arteries. These fluids are the internal carotid arteries. Now the impression of the MRI is sella suprasellar mass size 22 into 30 into 34 mm, causing optic chiasma compression of the anterior inferior part of the third ventricle, and no parasellar extension. So keeping in mind these findings, we have few differential diagnoses in our mind. The first differential diagnosis was that of a pituitary hyperplasia. Now the points in favor of pituitary hyperplasia was that there was symmetrical enlargement of the pituitary gland, there was very few cystic areas, and there was homogeneous enhancement, which was which is a bit atypical for a macroadenoma of this size. And also we can see that there was no encasement of the bilateral cavernous segments of the bilateral internal carotid arteries. That goes in the favor of pituitary hyperplasia. Now the second diagnosis was pituitary macroadenoma. Such extensive enlargement of the pituitary gland is quite rare in a pituitary hyperplasia. Also, however, there were few small cystic areas and figure of 8 appearance was seen, which is seen in both pituitary macroadenoma and pituitary hyperplasia. Now, the third so in this case, it was very difficult for us to differentiate between hyperplasia and adenoma. However, pituitary hyperplasia was more likely. Now third diagnosis was coexisting pituitary hyperplasia with macroadenoma because of common features of hyperplasia and macroadenoma, and metastasis was less likely. No definite focal lesion was seen in the pituitary gland and no definite bony erosion was seen. Now I would like to call Dr. Puneet from Endocrinology department to continue the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nalin. So once the neoplastic etiology was suspected in the left side of lung, FDG whole body PET CT scan was done, which was suggestive of homogeneous FDG uptake in suprasellar region, left lung fields and mediastinal lymph nodes, suggesting a mitotic pathology of left lung and pituitary. During her ward stay, after 72 hours, she suddenly developed severe headache, vomiting, drooping of the right eyelid, further decrease in the vision. She became dull, drowsy and confused. So we suspected pituitary apoplexy with right total ophthalmoplegia. So she was shifted to ICU and she was started on IV dexamethasone and somatostatin analog therapy, that is octreotide. When she got better, her MRI sella was repeated and it was suggestive of hemorrhage inside the pituitary mass, and the size of the pituitary had also increased. Her vitals and sensorium improved with steroid and octreotide therapy after 48 hours. She was shifted to endocrinology ward and an ophthalmology review was taken in view of right eye total ophthalmoplegia, and a respiratory medicine opinion was also taken. After apoplexy, she developed total ophthalmoplegia in the right eye, severe ptosis and 30-degree exotropia in the right eye. Her vision decreased dramatically, and she developed right, third, fourth and sixth cranial nerve palsy and left-sided sixth cranial nerve palsy. So now I would like to invite Dr. Apoorv to tell us more about the respiratory findings of this patient.
Thank you, Dr. Puneet. So the patient was referred to our department with complaints of dyspnea, frequent episodes of bronchospasm, and radiology findings showing left lung mass. So for further workup, bronchoscopy and pulmonary function assessment were done. On bronchoscopy, as you can see that the mucosa of the carina and the left main bronchus were inflamed, hyperemic, friable and bleed on touch. Also the lumen of the left main bronchus was compressed due to extraluminal compression. There was no obvious endobronchial growth or lesion seen, hence endobronchial biopsy was not taken and an image guided biopsy was advised. Then following this, pulmonary function test was done in which a spirometry was performed. In this we can see the FEV1 value was 41% lower than the predicted value, showing a compromised lung function. However, it has to be taken into consideration that it is reflective of a single lung, as the left lung is not participating in respiration because of compression of the left main bronchus by the lung mass. Then to assess the vascularity of the healthy right lung, a perfusion scan was done. In this you can see that the perfusion of the right lung, which is depicted in black, it means that the perfusion was adequate, while the left lung, it was negligible. So it indicates a ventilation perfusion mismatch. Then the patient was advised optimization with incentive spirometry and aggressive bronchodilator, and the USG guided lung biopsy was done. Now I invite Dr. Aditya from Department of Oncopathology to comment on the histopathological findings. Thank you.
Which bronchodilator was advised?
Duolin was used, salbutamol, ipreitropium bromide, which contains salbutamol and ipreitropium bromide for episodes of bronchospasm. It is a short-acting beta agonist.
This treatment was advised before USG-guided biopsy of the lung or after?
Sir, it was advised before. It's for general optimization as the patient was having bronchospasm episodes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Apoorv. Very good morning to one and all. I am Dr. Aditya Mundra, first year DM resident in the Department of Oncopathology, and I'll be discussing the pathological aspect of this particular case. We received USG guided core biopsies ranging from 1.7 to 2.2 centimeters in length. On microscopic examination, high power view of hematoxylin and eosin stain slides showed small to round tumor cells arranged in nests, which were separated by thin fibrous septae, which is also known as organoid formation. Also, these tumor cells were arranged in trabeculae. These particular tumor cells were round to oval in shape, having moderate amount of eosinophilic cytoplasm and a characteristic salt and pepper chromatin with inconspicuous nucleoli. There was no punctate necrosis or mitotic figures seen in this particular section. All the above mentioned features are of neuroendocrine tumor. So immunohistochemical examination was performed for further confirmation and subtyping. These tumor cells showed diffuse cytoplasmic expression for synaptophysin and diffuse nuclear positivity for TTF1. The Ki-67 proliferation index was less than 3% and the tumor cells were negative for growth hormone. So summarizing the histopathological and immunohistochemical examination findings, an impression of well-differentiated neuroendocrine tumor WHO grade 1 was given of the left lung. These tumors are also known as typical carcinoids. Now I request Dr. Puneet to further discuss the case.
Thank you, Dr. Aditya. So to summarize the whole case till now, she is a 41 years old female with florid acromegaly, hyperprolactinemia, secondary hypopituitarism, cellular mass which could be either pituitary hyperplasia or adenoma, pituitary apoplexy with right eye total ophthalmoplegia with a well differentiated lung neuroendocrine tumor. So what is the provisional diagnosis of this patient? It can be a coincidental finding of GH secreting pituitary macroadenoma and a lung carcinoid as a dual pathology. It can be a multiple endocrine neoplasia 1 syndrome, as our patient had pituitary adenoma and lung carcinoid. It can be a lung carcinoid with pituitary metastasis, or it can be a GHRH secreting lung carcinoid causing pituitary hyperplasia, and it is leading to ectopic acromegaly.
So here the actually challenging part of the case starts, and before we proceed further, we need to keep in mind we have, because of happening of apoplexy, we are against a very strict timeline. We need to act, and we need to really act fast. Otherwise, the patient's vision loss is going to be permanent. We don't have a time and liberty of time and spending and sending investigations. So all these 4 possibilities were considered, and before I proceed further, let me give a brief overview what we are talking about. So one possibility was MEN1 syndrome, which is because of the mutation in menin gene located on chromosome 11, and what it leads to formation of tumors in multiple endocrine glands. Most common of them, as we know, 3 Ps, that is pituitary, pancreas and parathyroids, and there are neuroendocrine tumors of thymus, lung, again GI, gastrointestinal tract, as well as sometimes in adrenal also. So this is the part of MEN1 we see, and there are certain specific skin finding like collagenomas, angiofibromas, lipomas we see in MEN1 syndrome. So let's see what our patient have. Our patient had pituitary adenoma, our patient had bronchopulmonary, and it is lung carcinoid. So we had 2 components of MEN1 in this patient, and to satisfy the clinical criteria for diagnosis for MEN1 is having 2 out of 3 or 4 components of MEN1. So by that definition, the patient was actually fulfilling the MEN1 syndrome criteria and should be treated according to MEN1 disease. Now coming to briefly about acromegaly. Acromegaly is basically a state of GH excess. This GH excess can come from anywhere. So in 99.9% cases, the pathology resides in the pituitary, which may be in the form of adenoma, which may be in the form of carcinoma, or maybe in the form of hyperplasia. Rarely, less than 0.001 case, it can be an ectopic acromegaly, which can be of 2 types. Either direct GH excretion from some tumors like neuroendocrine tumors or lymphomas, or there may be tumors which are secreting GHRH, like bronchial carcinoid, thymic carcinoid, pheochromocytoma. All these neuroendocrine tumor can secrete the GHRH, which will act on the pituitary and then leads to excess GH formation, which will lead to all the symptomatology of acromegaly. So there is going to be an adenoma or hyperplasia in GHRH secreting tumor also. So now we need to differentiate these 2 things, and actually we do not have any tools available in India to separate this entity as of now. First thing is, we do not have GHRH level available in India. Only 2 or 3 centers in the world actually do this GHRH test. As a part of research, it is not available as a part of services anywhere in the world. Second, we can send MEN genetics, but again, sending it and the actual turnaround time is 20 to 30 days whenever we get the report, and we don't have simply the liberty of the time because we need to act in view of apoplexy. So whatever we have, we need to take the decision based on the clinical finding and consideration. And this diagnostic dilemma, that what is it, MEN versus ectopic acromegaly, it was translating into the treatment dilemma also. So should we do pituitary surgery first, then lung surgery? Should we do simultaneous lung surgery as well as pituitary surgery, or we just simply do lung surgery, considering it's a case of very ectopic acromegaly? and then what extent to we should do the surgery, lobectomy, pneumonectomy, that was another discussion. So let's see what happens. If patient is a case of MEN1 syndrome, if patient is a case of ectopic acromegaly, and we try to do pituitary surgery thinking it is going to save your vision, what will happen? One thing is that patient is going to remain uncured 100% because the pathology lies outside the pituitary, which will again increase the GHRH secretion, lead to pituitary hyperplasia, and same thing will happen again. And second, the treatment of ectopic acromegaly is the removal of the ectopic tumor, not the pituitary. As soon as you take out the source of GHRH, pituitary will automatically settle down. So actually pituitary surgery is just unnecessary. And if it is an MEN1 syndrome, and if we go for lung surgery, then in lung MEN1 syndrome, both entity exist as separately and both need to be dealt separately. Here actually the pituitary surgery deserves merit first because it is causing the vision impairment, and in fact can have a potential to cause permanent vision loss. So how do we proceed further? Actually, we don't have any backup of investigation. Because of this, we had a special board meeting for this patient, consisting of Department of Medical Oncology, Surgical Oncology, Neurosurgery, Neuroanesthesia, General Surgery, because there are a lot of issues about the surgical aspect also. Then Department of Radiology and Endocrinology and Oncopathology and so on, to deliberate and decide the further course. So this team decided based on what clinical facts will present to them and took a clinical decision. So what do we have? We have a MEN1, which is actually much more common than an ectopic acromegaly that we need to start with. There is a rare syndrome and there is a relatively common entity. Then in MEN1 we have two components, that's fine. But what was stark and very disturbing, that in spite of having two significant components of MEN1, patient was not having hyperparathyroidism. And for residents, I must tell you that the hyperparathyroidism is actually the first manifestation and the most common manifestation which should be there in an MEN1 syndrome. In addition to that, we do not have any clinical features. So that was going a little against the picture of MEN1. But there can be exceptions. The patient is still 40 years of age. It may evolve with time in future. Then second is ectopic acromegaly. So we have acromegaly in the setting of a tumor which is known in the literature to cause ectopic acromegaly. So that is also a real possibility, and unfortunately we did not have anything to oppose that thing. We did not have any backup of this thing. But after maybe in a hour of deliberation, ultimately we tried to go with a gut feeling and the instinct and the clinical acumen and logic that that the absence of hyperpara was a very strong indicator of not having an MEN1 without genetics, and we decided to go for left pneumonectomy without going for pituitary surgery first. Now there were numerous challenges about the anesthesia and surgery. We cannot cover everything into this CCR, so that will be presented by Department of Anesthesiology in next CCR. What were the special situations which they dealt with? So I will just come to the follow-up. This is the day 5 picture of the female. As you can see, there is a partial recovery of the ptosis as well as partial recovery of the extraocular muscles. We can see clear cut here. The picture was depicted after the permission of the patient. And at the same time, we just discharged her on day 10 with hormone replacement therapy, whatever hormones were deficient there. And surprisingly, her diabetes disappeared. The person who was requiring 300 units of insulin or 250 units of insulin suddenly on day 5 became non-diabetic. So we stopped. So that again supported little bit in hindsight. Probably what we did was the right thing in our patient. And meanwhile, after 1 month, we received this report also, menin gene report, which came out to be as expected. What we are expecting it to be negative, it came out to be negative. 1 month follow-up, patient again progressively doing well, ptosis further improved, extraocular muscle movement further improved, and check bronchoscopy was normal. It was a very great surgical job. There was no leak, no fistula. In spite that we are dealing with an uncontrolled diabetic patient who was on steroid. There are a lot of risk of complications, so patient did well. This is the day 90 follow-up. This is the day 90 follow-up. As you can see, all the soft tissue changes have slightly or they are going significantly decreased. The extraocular movements is completely normal. Ptosis completely recovered. Vision also improved significantly. And from light perception to it actually goes to finger counting at 3 meters. And we are expecting that this vision improvement is going to improve further and further as the time passes, maybe up to 1 year. So we hope that probably she will get at least most of 60 or 70% of the pre-surgery vision, and that is without pituitary surgery. This is about the biochemistry, that we can see the GH level, which was pre-operatively at 90 nanogram per ml, dropped down significantly just to 0.5, again without pituitary surgery. Then there is IGF-1 as well as prolactin, which was in 700s and 500s, it became again normal without pituitary surgery. This is the post-op picture, MRI done at the 3 months. We can see the first is the baseline image, and the second one is actually the patient's image at 3 months of age, and we can 3 months of surgery, and we can see significant reduction in the size of tumor, almost 50%, as well as and the complete almost release of the mass effect that was there on the chiasm. So once we took out the GHRH source, the pituitary mass also came down in size, and so till now we were happy with the results. Now how do we prove it, at least when it comes to publication? So we have to have two things, one which we need to have GHRH level and one we need to have GHRH staining. Unfortunately, we do not have facility in India, even worldwide very few centers are doing it. We have arranged and we have shipped the sample, both pre-op and post-op, which we have collected for GHRH staining. GHRH results, Dr. Gerald from France have agreed to do it, and soon we are going to hear about the report. However, at this juncture, we have been able to get the GHRH ISC done. What have we done? Basically, we have tried to see whether the GRH protein is expressed in the lung carcinoid cells or not, for which anti-GHRH antibody is being taken, and in our case 15 to 50% of cells showed strong reactivity to anti-GHRH antibodies, which indicate that there is an expression of GHRH proteins in carcinoid cell, which ultimately proves the theory that the GHRH excess in this patient was coming from the carcinoid tissue, not from the hypothalamus, and leading to acromegaly. So this was the complete diagnosis in our patient. I think we need to skip. So take home message from this case is acromegaly caused by ectopic GHRH is very rare disease. In last 75 years we had 120 case. As of now, world see 1 to 2 case per year. This is the world incidence. No case from India has been reported till now from all the institutions. Then signs, symptoms, biochemistries are actually exactly same in utopic and ectopic acromegaly. We need to deliberate further, see each and everything and decide whether patient source of GH is extrapituitary or pituitary. Especially when we found this acromegaly and there is no obvious tumor in the pituitary, then you should suspect ectopic acromegaly. When there is apparently good surgery, there is a removal of tumor and patient still remained uncured, then we should also suspect ectopic acromegaly. And third and most important thing, whenever patient is having acromegaly in association with tumors which are known to cause GHRH secretion like lung carcinoid, like thymic carcinoid, we should always consider the possibility of ectopic acromegaly. And in this case, so by this clinical logics, we managed this patient even without report, and ultimately we got the results also, which was quite satisfying. And the whole list of department, I think 10 or 12 department, I will enumerate from neurosurgery to ophthalmology to respiratory medicine, radio diagnosis, oncology, surgical oncology, pathology, radiology, they have contributed, respiratory medicine contributed a lot in achieving this diagnosis in this patient. It was a real teamwork, because till the time of that board meeting, we were not sure what we are going to do in this patient and how do we proceed against a very strict timeline. And with this, I will end up in this case, and if there are any questions, I will be like to answer. Thank you.
I think 2 or 3 messages for the students. Normally we see patients with symptoms related to one system. If you see a patient with symptoms related to multiple systems, then you should think of an organ which can affect multiple systems. So pituitary being one, you should think of diabetes, you should think of tuberculosis, you should think of a syndrome which can have multiple manifestations. That is number 1. Number 2, this is an example where sometimes, not always, sometimes wisdom has to go against the evidence. I think it was the wisdom of the board
which took this decision, because you yourself said that this is a very, very, very rare cause, but still you took that decision. So that is where experience and wisdom counts. Third, I wanted to ask that was the immunohistochemistry done before or after?
After, sir, because we have sent the sample, but it was done again at Paris, so we got the result.
Oh, IHC also done in Paris?
Yes, sir.
We do not have anti-Titer antibody in India.
So I think this was a true example where multidisciplinary approach helps. And if you hear hoofbeats outside your window, you normally think of a horse or sometimes a donkey. But sometimes, very rarely, you can have a zebra outside also. So this is as rare as that, a zebra outside your window diagnosed by the hoofbeats. So big round of applause for the endocrinology department. And we close the CCR with this. Thank you very much.